everyone. I'm very excited to introduce our next session. In his 25 years in radio promotion, Jason Prinzo has become somewhat of a pop promotion legend. He's seen it all, the good and the bad, through VP promotion roles at Warner and Capitol, and his own promotion company, which he's run for the last 15 years. Like many of us, he's also had his own struggles with mental health. He's been in therapy since he was 5 years old, and he has learned a lot that he's going to share today. He's very dedicated to addressing things openly and honestly and ending any stigma that's associated with mental health issues. He's an ambassador for the National Association for Mental Illness. He helps train the Chicago Police Department on best practices for diffusing situations with those with mental illness. And he is particularly passionate about helping those in the music industry overcome mental health challenges in this very unique business. Please give a warm welcome to Jason Prinzo.
So I first discovered that I had anxiety at probably the worst possible time. It was my honeymoon. My wife and I had gotten married. We flew to Vegas for a quick little 4-day honeymoon. We land on Saturday. We have a great dinner. Sunday, we decide we're going to go gambling and drink. We're just going to have a great time. But Monday and Tuesday was going to be our days that we really kicked back and relaxed. We had a cabana rented by the pool. We're just going to sit, get sunburnt, drink too much, and just relax and reset for going back to work the next week. Woke up Monday morning, about 8:30 in the morning, and I quickly realized that on the East Coast, everybody was working. And my muscle memory started telling me that I needed to be working as well. But I thought, no, it's my honeymoon. I'm allowed to be on vacation. This is okay. I don't need to worry about this. But we were impacting a record that week, so I felt a lot of pressure to make sure that the week went well. Start to head down to the pool, and the closer we got to the pool, the further my mind went away from my honeymoon, and I started thinking about work. We get down in the pool, we set up, my wife and I get in, and we do that thing that new couples do where she's got her legs around my waist and her hand around my neck, and we're floating in the pool like this. You know, I don't know why new couples do that, but it's like a rite of passage. I'm not sure why. So while my wife is staring at me and she's loving the idea that we're on our honeymoon and thinking about the wedding we just had, I'm wondering how the week's going at work. It's a really important record we were dropping. I said to my wife, I just want to go send one email. Just let me send one email. Let me see how the week's going and I'll feel okay. So I go get in the cabana and I sit down and click, and send my email. About 5 minutes goes by, I don't hear back. So now that knot in my stomach is really starting to tighten. I look at my wife, I go, just give me 5 minutes, I'll be okay. Another 5-10 minutes goes by, I don't hear anything back. Now the lie that my brain is starting to tell me at this point is that if I don't work and we have a bad week, it's gonna be my fault and I'm gonna be fired. On the flip side, if I don't work and we have a great week, that's confirmation that they don't need me and I'm gonna be fired. So what should I do? I'm gonna get an ad. I'm gonna go get an ad real quick. Because if I can get an ad while I'm on my honeymoon, it is gonna show them that, boy, look how dedicated Jason is. He really cares about this job. He's getting ads on his honeymoon. What a guy. Hour and a half goes by, I don't have any ads. I'm not hearing back from my bosses, and I'm freaking out. After 3 hours, my wife finally got fed up and said, you do whatever you need to do. I'm going to the room. We'll try it again tomorrow. She doesn't understand the pressure of being in record promotion is. I'll explain it to her later. We'll have a good day tomorrow. Tuesday is an instant replay of Monday. And I quickly realize I have ruined our honeymoon. We go to the airport the next day. We're getting ready to go through security. I check my email, and I get the dreaded, your company card has been shut off for non-payment. And it is an instant meltdown. If I'm not getting fired for not working all week, now I'm getting fired because I'm supposed to be on the road next week, and now I can't pay for it. And I'm gonna have to cancel my meetings. And in that moment, I am convinced that my job is over. and I'm going into a full-on panic attack at this point. My wife walks up and grabs me by the hands, and she says, when we get home, I need you to go to the doctor because you have anxiety, and I need you to go get help. No, I don't. Stop it with this. I don't have, you don't understand, I'm stressed. Radio, my wife's in radio. I go, radio pressure is different. I'm judged week to week. If I have one bad week, the entire project is over. So if we're going to be married and you're going to live with a promotion guy, I need you to understand what this stress is like. And she grabbed my hands harder and she says, you have anxiety. It's not only affecting you, but it's affecting me. And my heart sunk. I got my entire marriage off on the wrong foot because I'm stressing about work. See, there's a big difference between being anxious and being stressed about a work event, something going on in your life, a decision that needs to be made, and anxiety disorder. For most people, when the event is over, when the decision has been made, it's fleeting. Those feelings go away. But for those of us that suffer from anxiety, those feelings never go away. When the life event is over, when the decision is made, those feelings don't go away. They just transfer to something else. And it's constant. It is every part of our lives. I can't get up to go get a glass of water without having an internal battle in my head of going, well, if I get up to get a glass of water, should I go to the bathroom too? Because I don't want to get up and then sit back down and then go back and do it again. It is a constant battle. And we have these fears that catastrophe is always right around the corner. And for those of you that don't suffer, this is going to sound ridiculous, that the worst possible outcome is the only outcome. But in those moments, it's 100% truth to us. And we get frustrated when you don't understand. And it takes a while to process this stuff because we have things that happen to us as children sometimes that start us in a bad path. So one of the things that would happen quite a bit, aside from when I talked about my honeymoon, is I had a boss that I really liked. Great guy, love him to this day. But I was scared of him. He's a boss. Always scared of my bosses. There would be times that I would call him on the phone, and his assistant would say, he can't talk right now, he's going to call you back. From the time my phone left my ear to me hanging it up, the lie that my brain was telling me was that he's mad at me, I'm going to get fired, we're going to lose the house, my wife's going to leave me, I'm going to be living in a one-room apartment for the rest of my life. And that was my truth. And I froze up. I'm completely frozen because I don't know what to do next. Because now I have to save my job, I have to save my house, I have to save my marriage, and I don't know which one to fix first. Because do I go get ads? Do I try to fix this? But can we afford the house on one salary if I lose my job? If my wife leaves me, where am I going to live? Because I don't know what Starbucks pays. Because how am I going to afford to have an apartment? And you freeze. I'm completely frozen at that point. You're going to hear me talk a little bit today about the physical feelings of mental illness. And we all know that mental illness can be thought of as an invisible disease. It doesn't show up in a scan, doesn't show up in an x-ray, doesn't show up in blood work, you don't get a rash. But make no mistake that there are physical feelings that come with mental illness. And a lot of times it's our first sign of trouble. So in those moments, I feel physically sick. That knot in my stomach is tightening even more. And I am trying to figure out how to keep my life from crashing. But I can't move. I'm frozen. And it'll be 3 hours later until my boss calls back, and I'll quickly realize whatever it was that I was believing was totally false. And then I'm embarrassed because this is the same thing I felt last week, it's the same thing I felt the week before, and the week before that, and I can't stop it from happening. And the funny thing is, when I tell you who this boss was that I was scared of, you're gonna laugh because he's one of the nicest guys in the world. And I don't know, is Dennis Reese in here somewhere? Dennis, I love you. You didn't do anything to make me feel this way. It's just my own brain lying to me, but you scared the hell out of me every single week. I love you too, Dennis. So, anxiety can happen for a lot of reasons. It can be your chemical makeup. It can be, where you are in your life right now. It can be from substance abuse. It can just be plain hereditary. But does anybody know what the number one reason the number one cause of anxiety in adults: childhood trauma. When we experience trauma as children, we are not emotionally mature enough to understand how to process these feelings. And so we develop our own fight or flight. We develop our own protection in order to get us through these things. But the things that we develop, these tools that we develop as kids, we carry on into adulthood. And we may change the process a little bit, but these tools that we use aren't effective as adults. We start to isolate. There can be a lot of anger. I had a lot of anger for a long time. My anxiety would scare me. And so my way of beating the anxiety was to meet it head on, because catastrophe was always about to happen. I can draw a through line from my father to my anxiety as an adult, now that I understand what I was going through. My father loved three things in life: drugs, alcohol, and violence, and he was really good at all three of them. My childhood life before my father left was a constant cycle of me trying to keep the house calm. My father was always at a low boil, and when it got bad, you didn't want to be around it. The house would get torn up. I had to protect my mom, and so I felt that it was my job to keep him calm. So you're always waiting for catastrophe. You're always nervous because it's that one thing. Is it, if I walk up the steps and it creaks, is it going to wake him up and set him off? You just never know what's going to happen. And one of my earliest memories with my father was around 4 or 5 years old. We're driving home, and a school bus cut us off. And you are not going to disrespect my father by cutting him off. So the only logical thing to do at that point was to chase the school bus. So we chase the school bus. My father waits until the bus pulls into a cul-de-sac, and he pulls up, blocks the bus in, and all 6'2", 240 pounds of him jumps out of the car and runs up and starts banging on the bus doors, trying to get the driver out. And I remember the fear that I had as a kid in that moment, just the energy that you could feel of all this anger. And I remember seeing the fear on the eyes of the kids in the bus was probably the same fear that I had in my eyes. Eventually, my father relented. We went back home. About a year later, my parents divorced. His alcoholism and his drug abuse kicked up, and so did the violence. There would be times then that my mother and I would be leaving the house, and we lived on this street that was kind of horseshoe-shaped, and it went out to a main road, so you could get in and out on both sides. My father would wait for us in his car. We'd pull out. We'd start driving up the street. My father would come up and start smashing into the back of our car to get us to stop. My mom would speed up. If he could get alongside of us to push us over to the cars on the right, he would do that. And what played out every time was my mom would do like hillbilly NASCAR, where she would just start driving in circles to get a big enough lead that 6-year-old me would be able to jump out of the car and run into the house and call the police and my father. And this was happening constantly. So the anxiety was there. It was already bad. My mother made the amazing decision to get remarried to my father a year later. And then a year after that, divorced again. So we're going to leave my abandonment issues out of this right now, because that's a different conversation. Because of my father's violence, we moved a lot. There were no stalking laws. So by the time I graduated high school, I went to 8 schools. I lived in about 15 different houses. So it was always, when's the next catastrophe? Because we're leaving. We don't unpack bags, we're leaving. Make friends, lose them, we're leaving. My father's violence really hit a breaking point. I was laying in bed one night, I was sleeping, and I hear boom, boom, boom. And gunshots in all the windows of the house except for my room. And we knew it was my father, right? We knew it was him. Nobody else shooting out our windows. And the bullet casings that were in the wall matched the ammunition that he had left at the house from when he lived there. So now, even though my father's not in the house, we still don't feel safe. I'm still waiting for the next catastrophe. Now I can't sleep at night. About 2 weeks later, trying to sleep, boom, 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 boom. It happens again. Now I'm 7 or 8 years old at this point. I wasn't smart enough to know not to run to the window because, God forbid, it wasn't my father. It could have been a bad situation, but I see my father's car driving away. That feeling of catastrophe and that feeling of violence has never left me. I talk about how I have a lot of anger, and it's because I feel anger is always coming to me, and the only way that I can match it and keep it away is to meet it halfway. And it's tough to get rid of these habits. It's really difficult because we're not emotionally intelligent enough at a young age to understand what we're going through. We just don't know. And we were never taught any coping mechanisms. Nobody's ever telling us at an age, at 6, 7 years old, that what you're going through isn't your fault, that this isn't normal, that you don't have to process this, or let's talk about it. Let's see what this is about. There's no letting it out. I started in therapy at 5 because my teachers at school knew a lot of stuff that was going on. So I'm very familiar with therapy, and that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. But as I've gotten older and I've come to grips with the idea of anxiety, I've learned a lot of things that are really helpful for me when I feel it coming on. Again, we're going to talk about the physical things that happen with anxiety. For me, I can feel my shoulders rising up. I can feel that knot in my stomach getting really tight. I'll feel physically ill. And when I feel that stuff coming on, that is my signal that I need to do something right now to keep from a panic attack happening or keep this cycle from going. And if anybody in here has ever experienced panic attacks, they are very similar to the feeling of having a heart attack. And I know that sounds ridiculous to anybody that hasn't experienced it before. I can tell you my wife had a panic attack on the air one day, got rushed to the hospital because she thought she was having a heart attack. My mother experienced panic attacks all the time, so I got very familiar with it. So when I feel that anxiety coming on, and I can feel it physically happening, there's a few things that I like to do. One is short bursts of anything physical. If I can find somewhere to go and I can do 15, 20 push-ups, some people like to run in place, some people like to do jumping jacks. It releases some cortisol in your brain and kind of resets you a little bit to where it moves you away from what those feelings are and can kind of give you a fresh start. Another one that I like to do, and this one works for me especially at night, we all know at night your mind starts wandering. There's no distraction. It is just going from one problem to the other. And my brain at night tells me all the things that are going to go wrong tomorrow. So in order for me to get to sleep, I like to do box breathing. And all box breathing is you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4, and you hold for 4. You have to do this 5 or 6 times. You cycle through this 5 or 6 times. I like to do box breathing because I can't concentrate long enough to meditate or do deep breathing. I can still stress while trying to meditate. I can still stress while trying to do deep breathing, but focusing on the cadence and the changes allows enough of a distraction for me to where I can move past whatever I'm feeling. It's really calming for me. A lot of people keep lavender with them. The smell of lavender has proven to have sedative and calming effects. So a lot of people will keep a lotion or perfume or a scented bag that smells like lavender. It's extremely helpful. Anything creative, artistic, painting, adult coloring books, cooking, music, any of that stuff is fantastic. I got into painting. I started it because of my anxiety. And the most calm that you'll ever find me is when I'm painting. In fact, I have to set an alarm when I'm doing it because I'll go 6 or 7 hours without eating, drinking, doing anything because it is the most relaxed you'll ever find me, and I don't want that place to end. Now, unfortunately, we may not ever beat our anxiety, but there are, as I mentioned, some things we can do to try to maintain it. And unfortunately, for a lot of us with anxiety, and a lot of people in our industry, we suffer from imposter syndrome. And all imposter syndrome is unfounded feelings of self-doubt and incompetence. I think unfounded is the key word in this phrase, right? Now, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome for a minute, and I promise you, most people in this room are sitting here thinking that I'm talking directly to them. They think they're the only ones in here that are frauds, and they're looking around going, man, he's talking about me. And then everybody's looking at me. But the person sitting next to you is feeling the exact same thing. And I know this because 8 out of 10 people suffer from imposter syndrome. Matter of fact, the more successful people get, the more likely they are to suffer from imposter syndrome, which doesn't make any sense, right? The people that are the most successful feel as if they don't deserve it, they don't belong. And all of us that suffer from it have this feeling of incompetence that any success we had, we think is just timing and luck. Any failure that we had is completely our fault. We don't allow ourselves credit for doing anything properly. We think we've gotten very lucky. And this can have a really detrimental effect on our careers. We have more job dissatisfaction. We tend to not go for promotions. We tend to not speak up in meetings. How many times have you guys been in a meeting, brainstorming, problem solving, and you have an idea? Like, I'm gonna bring this one up. This is a good one. And right before you say it, you go, I don't know. This is probably not a good idea. If I say this, they're gonna think I don't understand the problem. Maybe they're gonna think I'm not fit for this job that I don't understand, so you keep it to yourself. You don't say anything. About 5 minutes later, somebody else brings up the exact same idea, and everybody loves it. You're like, what was I doing? I should have said something. Next time I'm gonna say something. Next time I'm gonna bring it up, and everybody's gonna love me for it. And the next time comes, you don't say it. Next time comes, you don't say it. Because we're so afraid that this veil that isn't really there is gonna be pulled away. How does this happen? Right? Like, how do all these people in this room, the center of the country music world, how do all these people suffer from imposter syndrome and think that they're not good enough? It's our brains constantly lying to us. There's a thing called the illusion of truth effect, and it's the tendencies to believe repeated false information. Tendencies to believe repeated false information. It is a form of brainwashing. It's the same thing that cult leaders use, that abusers use, politicians on both sides use. They're constantly drilling false information into our brains. We're doing that ourselves. We're telling ourselves these negative thoughts all of the time, and we're not giving ourselves the other side of it, the positive thoughts. So of course you're going to believe that you're not good enough. Of course you're going to believe as if you've gotten lucky. There's nothing telling you otherwise, and we don't believe people when they give us the other side of it. We don't want to believe that we are worthy of it because our failures are confirmation of what we already believe. Our success, as I mentioned, is just luck, but our failures are confirmation. So we end up believing these things. And again, there are a few things you can do. One of the things that I like is I love going back. I try to go back and read old emails or text messages where I'm getting praise for work. It's always a great one for me because it's a reminder that I've had success. I like to keep a list of accomplishments that I've had over my life. They can be big or small. They can be promotions you had. It could be that you made the all-star team, on your T-ball league. It can be anything. But when we experience them, we're experiencing them over time. So they don't feel as big. But when we read them in a vacuum, it can seem a lot more impressive. And you look at it and you go, wow, I did all of that. I can do some of these things. I am worthy of some of this stuff. And these things can be extremely effective for us. Managers have a big part in this as well. And when we're talking about work, one of the things that I try to tell managers to do is make it easy for your people to come and ask for help. If you're struggling with a project, you want to be able to go to your boss and say, I need some help with this. Is it just stuck a little bit? Without fear of you guys telling us that we're not competent or that you don't believe in us anymore, or that we're not going to get the next assignment. So you need to make it okay for people to come and ask for help. The other thing is, teams are made up of a bunch of different personalities and different strengths and weaknesses. And as a manager, it is your job to give assignments to people that fit their strengths. If you're constantly giving people something to do that is their weakness, it's going to be complete failure every time. Not only is the project not going to be completed, but you're going to lose that employee because they're going to feel like a failure all of the time. One of the biggest things that I like to talk about when I talk about people that are supervisors, managers, especially if you have a large team and they work around the country. Randomly email or text your people and tell them that you appreciate them and you appreciate their work. I say to do this over email or text message because I think it lands a lot better than when you do it in person. Because when you do it in person, we feel as if that's what you have to say. Of course you're going to say that. We're standing here. The thing on the record side that when we go visit radio, one of the standard lines is, "Oh man, the station sounds great." We all say it, right? And the radio guy gets it. He's like, "Oh, thanks, man," because he knows you're just saying it to say it. We know we're just saying it to say it. And it's like this whole little dance. But if I send an email to a PD in Phoenix, it was like, "Hey, I was listening online. The station sounds great." That is going to land so much better. So if you get an email or a text from your boss randomly that just says, "I just want you to know I notice all the hard work you're doing. It's really appreciated. Just know that you're seen." It will mean as much as a raise. I promise you. Obviously, money is a big factor in what we want to do, but feeling appreciated is just as big. When you think about how much we work every day, we work 8 to 10 hours a day. There's more time than we spend with our friends, with our family, with our significant others. And if our relationships at home were struggling, if we felt unseen, if we felt unappreciated, that the work we were doing in the relationship wasn't having any value, that relationship would fall apart and be over. We have a relationship with our jobs as well. We have a relationship with our careers. And we need to feel these exact same things. And we need it from both sides. It can't just be us looking for it all the time. We need it from the people that mean the most to us, which is our bosses and our supervisors. So I think it's really important that we understand that this is a relationship. This isn't a work, you're my boss, I'm your employee kind of deal. We have a relationship here, and we need to make sure that it's going to remain strong, because it's going to be the most effective way to get work done and for all of us to be successful. A couple of other tools that I like to use is I think it's important to have shared experiences. So when you talk to friends or coworkers, don't be afraid to talk about how you're feeling about these feelings of incompetence or the feeling of not good enough, because what you're going to be surprised to find out is the person you're talking to is going to go, "Really? You seem like you have it all together. Like, I don't believe it. I feel that." And when you realize that the other person is feeling the exact same way, and it's somebody that you respect and somebody that you think has it all together, there's a bonding there, but it also relieves a little bit of that stress of feeling that you're the only one. Because when we have imposter syndrome, we think we're the one person in the room that doesn't belong. But one of the things to keep in mind is that actual frauds don't have imposter syndrome. People with imposter syndrome think their work's not good enough. Frauds are trying to distract you and hide their work. They're usually the people that manage up really well and then don't do any work. And not that managing up isn't a big part of what we do. It's an important part of all of our careers. But frauds only manage up, and they're great at it. So if you have imposter syndrome, just know you're not a fraud. You are absolutely not a fraud. One of my favorite things that I use is there's a sports psychologist named Todd Herman. And Todd wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect. And what his theory is that we all have multiple alter egos. We're one way when we're around our friends, we're different than when we're around our parents, around children, and we move seamlessly in and out of these alter egos. But we can develop one for work. We can develop one for our careers. What are the attributes that you want to have when you go to work every day? What does that look like for you? What's the person that you want to be? Give it a name. Make that person a different name. Athletes do this all the time. Nearly every famous athlete has a nickname. Let's take Deion Sanders. When Deion Sanders is off the field, he talks about how he likes to go fishing, spend time with his family, ride bikes. But when he's on the field, he's prime time. He's brash, he's cocky, he dances. But he obviously has the ability to be that guy. But in order to bring it out, he needs to transform into prime time. Just the same as we have the ability to be successful in our careers, we just need to find a way to transform into that. So what if I told you that one of the greatest leaders of the 20th century not only had imposter syndrome, but used this same tool? That Martin Luther King Jr. had imposter syndrome. That when he would sit down to write a speech, he didn't feel distinguished until he put on a pair of non-prescription clear lens glasses to write his speeches. We need to put them on because he felt like his most distinguished self in those moments. Martin Luther King Jr. had imposter syndrome. That's crazy. Now, if anybody's flying back through Atlanta on their way home, or if you're ever in the Atlanta airport, it's enormous. I couldn't tell you how to get there. It'd probably take you an hour if you've ever been through the Atlanta airport. It's like its own city. But there is a display of things dedicated to Martin Luther King, and there are a pair of his glasses in there, and there's a little story there as well that kind of goes along with what I was just talking about here. And it's insane that we feel this way. Like, I don't understand why these things keep happening to us, but there are a lot of these tools that we can use. Take these tools down that I'm talking about, whether it's the alter ego effect, whether it's reading your resume, whether it's going back and reading old emails. All of these things can help us get ahead of this when these feelings start. And it's important to understand, like I mentioned, the physical feelings, because that's going to be your first indication that these things are happening. We've talked about anxiety, talked about imposter syndrome, and one of the biggest ones that we all deal with is depression. And we're all familiar with depression at this point. We've talked about depression for decades. And nearly everybody at some point in their life will struggle with a bout of depression at some point. It's pretty normal. But for most people, it goes away. It's the only time you'll deal with it. But for those of us with clinical depression or depressive disorder, these feelings are always there. And it's a constant cycle of like this. You're good, you're bad. You're good, you're bad. And there's an overall feeling of worthlessness and sadness that comes along. And for those that don't suffer, depression is heavy. Depression is really heavy. You feel like you're underwater. You feel like you're in a vice, and it hurts. And unfortunately, we get into these places, and the effects of it are really difficult because there's a stigma behind all of mental illness, but especially depression. It's thought of as a character flaw or a weakness. And it's unfortunate because we're taught these things at a really young age. I'm really big on speaking to men when it comes to mental health because we're the worst at dealing with it. But when you think about the things that we're told at a really young age, of course we're going to struggle with this. Big boys don't cry. Toughen up. Stop being a baby. As men, we're allowed two acceptable emotions: happiness and anger. The fact that anger is an acceptable emotion is insane. But we're not allowed to be sad. We're not allowed to cry. We're not allowed to talk about our feelings. We are told to shove that down. We never learn how to deal with it and how to process it. Women, you guys get it differently. You're told that you're too emotional. Stop being sensitive. That all these things that we're feeling aren't because you have a disease. It's that your personality, you have these character flaws that make you feel this way. So we're talked out of our feelings at all times, and we don't want to deal with it because we're afraid to let this out. It took me years to come to grips with my mental illness and to be okay with it. I've been in therapy since I was 5. I was diagnosed with clinical depression at a really young age, and I was embarrassed. I was scared by it. And it wasn't until about 2017 when I decided I needed to own it. I was living a lie. Social media doesn't help. We see everybody's best face on social media. And while we're sitting at home doing nothing, we think all of our friends are living these great lives. And I was the same way. Everything that I posted was like, look at my life. And my life is amazing. I've experienced things that I never dreamed of as a kid. I've done things that would have never even entered my mind. The problem for me is I don't enjoy any of them. I can't wait for them to end because the longer they go, I think catastrophe is going to happen and it's going to get ruined. So all I want to do is go home and think about how much fun it was. Because the quicker it ends, the happier I'm going to end up. Because I don't want it to continue. We've got to start allowing ourselves to feel these things, and it's okay. It's okay to struggle with our mental health. It's okay to be open and ask for help. Mental illness has a huge effect on us, not only professionally, but for businesses. Every year there are 12 billion workdays lost to mental health. That's 50 million work years every year lost to mental health. That is a lot of productivity, but it's a lot of sadness, right? If we take mental health days without guilt, we have vacations, we have sick days. We are allowed a mental health day is a sick day. It is okay to take it because if you don't, you are just going to fire off at some point. You are going to have a meltdown, and it's going to be a lot worse than if you don't take that Friday off and give yourself a break. Sorry, a little dry mouth here. So when we're suffering from depression, we use those tools that we learned as children. We start to isolate. It's hard to get out of bed. We're not tired, but we can't get out of bed. Getting out of bed feels like monumental at that point. Those days are really long. If you ever laid in bed without watching television, talking on the phone, about being on the computer, those hours are really long, and those days get really long, and it feels like it's never going to end. Depression hurts. It's really horrible. Sorry. I want to talk about suicide for a second. And if anybody's going to be triggered, or if anybody's uncomfortable, I want to give you a second to step out. And while we do that, I just want to mention that there is a national suicide prevention mental health crisis hotline, 988. Works just like 911. Put in your phones if you have to, 988. Something that irritates me to no end is when you hear about somebody that died by suicide and the initial reaction is, man, it's so selfish. The guy made a really selfish decision. He didn't want to deal with his problems. He wanted to leave it for everybody else. And that may be true. That may absolutely be true, but there are a lot of other factors. A lot of times, people feel as if they're damaging everybody else's lives, that they're hurting the people around them so much that not being here will be helpful, that they're doing so much damage to the people around them that they think they're giving them help by not being here, and they make a decision that affects them and everybody around them greatly. That's a big part of why people make the decision to try to die by suicide. The other part is that it hurts, it's painful, and we want the pain to go away. Just like any other disease, just like any other pain, we don't think it's ever ending and we just want it to stop. In 2020, I became suicidal for the very first time. Now, I had thought about suicide every single day for 30 years. Not that I wanted to do it, not that I thought I was going to do it, I kept it as an option. And I didn't know that was not normal. It became such a habit that I thought about suicide every single day. But in 2020, I started to normalize it so much that I knew how I was going to do it. I knew where I was going to do it. I knew I was going to do it in a way that nobody I loved was going to find me because I didn't want them to have to deal with that trauma. One of the hardest things that I ever had to do in my life was to go to my wife, the person I love the most, and say, life is too hard for me. I don't want to be here. Life is this hard. Thankfully, I have an extremely supportive wife. We went and got me help right away. And I took 2 weeks off work and I checked into a facility. I did outpatient therapy. It was extreme therapy, group therapy, one-on-one therapy. And it saved my life. Things that I learned at that time have put me on a different path. But it was really hard. I've gotten to such a good place from it, and I'm so happy that I've gotten there. And so when I try to explain that depression hurts, that you want to leave, my mother in 2008 was diagnosed with leukemia. It's been a lifelong battle with mental illness. Some of the side effects for her was she developed irritable bowel syndrome. When we talk about the physical effects, irritable bowel syndrome. She could barely leave the house. If she went anywhere, she could only go for an hour or two because she would need to run to the bathroom. So I was living in LA. I got the call. She has leukemia. I fly home that night, get to the hospital, and I'm getting ready to walk into her room, and I'm trying to get myself together because I don't know what I'm walking into. I walk into the room, and my mom is glowing. She's happy. She's smiling. She pulls me aside. She has everybody leave the room. She pulls me aside. She told me that leukemia was a blessing. She had a 60% cure rate, and she denied treatment because she said leukemia was a blessing because she wasn't going to live in pain anymore. She was so happy that this pain was going to go away at 67 years old. She was excited to die. The happiest I had ever seen my mother in my entire life was the 10 days from when we got her home from the hospital to when we had to get her heavily medicated because the leukemia was starting to take over. My mom didn't stop smiling. People came visit. She was with her kids. She was with her grandkids. And for all of us to get to see that was a gift. I didn't want my mom to die. But I loved that I got to see her happy for the first time. And that's how much depression hurts, that people want to die. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I am all about talk therapy. How many people in here have ever worked out with a personal trainer? How many people in here played sports as kids and had coaches? This is nearly everybody in the room. Only 30% of Americans have ever gone to therapy. So what if we changed the way that we look at therapy? What if we said that therapy was nothing but a trainer for your brain? And we looked at it that way. Because look, we eat diets in order to avoid diabetes or heart disease. We work out to keep ourselves physically fit so that we can be healthy. But we don't do anything about the most important part of our body, our brain, until there's a problem. We don't wait until our car breaks down to get an oil change. But we wait until there's a crisis mentally before we go and get help. And I don't understand this. And I know that there's a huge stigma behind therapy. And for people that haven't gone, if you're watching movies, it looks like you're just going to go in an office and lay on a brown leather couch while a guy just sits and takes notes, right? And that it's constantly going over trauma. And there are times that you definitely will dig into that trauma because it's important. I go to therapy every week. 90% of the time, we're talking about how can I maneuver living in this space? How do I continue to live healthy knowing that all these things happen? I don't have to go back and talk about the violence that I experienced as a child. I need to figure out how to get through life better with the outcome of that. And so I think people need to understand how effective therapy is. There was a recent poll that was done that 86% of people that have gone to therapy said that it helped them cope and get through life better than it was before they started. Now, unfortunately, the gap between when people first notice the signs of mental illness and when they eventually go and get help is 11 years. That is a huge chunk of our lives that we're wasting trying to fix things that we don't know how to fix or that we're denying is happening. 11 years. That's just before we start to get help. Therapy is extremely effective. And if anybody is feeling as if they need help, I beg you to go get it. We should all be working on it. It is a trainer for our brains. Now, there are a lot of other things that we can do to kind of get ahead of these things where you're never going to beat depression. It is a disease. You're going to be dealing with it your entire life, but we can manage it. Some of the things, I want to go back to men for a second. Men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women are. And again, it goes back to these stigmas that we have as men. Men use firearms to die by suicide at an alarming rate. 2022, there were 50,000 gun deaths in America. 25,000 of them were suicides. I don't keep a gun in the house. I have nothing against guns. I have a gun license. I have a conceal and carry license. But I know that it would take 5 minutes for me to make a horrible decision. I know within 5 minutes, my brain could tell me a lie that I would be better off not being here, that this pain is too much for me to be here, and that I need it to be over with, and for me to go grab a firearm and make a decision that changes not only my life, but the life of everybody that I love. That's how quick these things can happen, and we have to get ahead of it. So again, we talk about doing anything artistic. We talk about taking mental health days. Doing charity work is extremely helpful. When we're doing service for other people, it makes us feel necessary and it gives us a little bit of joy. So these are all little small things that we can do, right? We all hear working out. All those things are great, but we need to do a lot of these things all at the same time to keep us healthy. Working out, charity work. I like to keep what I call my happy list. And on my happy list is exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of things that make me happy. They can be big or small. They could be travel. I like to go get coffee. The process of walking to a coffee shop, having them make my coffee, me make my little mix, is really relaxing and fun for me. My wife likes to take baths. Whatever it is, make a list and try to incorporate one of those things in every day if you can. And that's what we talk about when you hear people talk about self-care. And I don't care if you can do it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if you have time to do it for an hour, try to incorporate these things into every day. It is extremely important that we take care of ourselves in these ways. Therapy, we talked about. The biggest thing that we can do is we need to check on each other. It is really important that we reach out to the people closest to us, just ask them how they're doing. Dennis Clark, the morning show consultant, told me one time that when you reach out to somebody, you ask them, hey, how are you doing? You're going to get kind of a normal answer of, hey, everything's good, I'm great. But if you stop and you ask again, but how are you really doing? At that point, people start opening up. And when you do this, if people open up to you, allow them to talk without judgment. Don't say to them, look at the bright side, or what do you have to be upset about? It's infuriating. We're feeling these things are very real to us, and the only thing that makes it harder is for us to have to argue with you to understand what we're feeling. So just allow us to talk. Check in on people, especially the people that seem the happiest. There's something called smiling depression. And all smiling depression is somebody that has everything together on the outside. They have healthy relationships, they're holding down steady jobs, they're the life of the party, but inside they're struggling and they don't want people to know. And we forget about those people sometimes because we think they're happy. And it's just another sign that all of us need to check in on each other. And the thing I'm going to leave you with is we have an amazing community here. This is my first CRS, and this has been such an amazing event for me. And the love that I've seen and felt this whole week needs to carry over to where we're checking on each other and we're making sure that we're all okay. Every one of us needs to find one person that we're comfortable talking to, one person that we're comfortable being ourselves and talking to them and letting it out. But we also need to be that for somebody else. So I just challenge everybody in here, find one person, be that for them. Let's make sure that we're here for each other, because this is an incredible industry and it has its own pitfalls that are different than any other industry that you're going to work in. I want to thank RJ and the whole CRS team for making this a huge part of your platform. Thank you for having me, and thank all of you guys for listening and letting me get this out. Thank you, guys.
Jason, thank you. Jason, thank you so much for your candor. That was really important. I do want to plug your mental health Instagram because I personally find it helpful and important. You can search Jason Prinzo on Instagram. It's mental health with JP, but no vowels in the mental. You know, you can only get so long. So MNTL health with JP. On Instagram. Really fantastic tips. We have a lot of really important and great questions, but not a lot of time. So I think I can probably only do one or two here.
Sure.
What do you do when you feel those physical feelings of anxiety coming on when you're on the air?
Ooh, that's a great question. I wish my wife were here to answer that. I think, look, from an outsider not doing radio, as quickly as you can, when you can get to commercial, that's when you have to do some of the tools that we talked about, whether it's box breathing, whether it's some quick physical exertion. I can't explain enough how helpful that is. And it doesn't sound like it would work, but it does. One of the other things that has been really helpful for me that my therapist taught me is understand what's happening and give it a name. Say, this is my anxiety right now, or this is my imposter syndrome, and allow it to happen. For weeks leading up to this, I laid in bed at night worrying that I wasn't good enough to do this, that people were going to walk out in the middle of my speech, that I was completely unqualified. But I knew that if I got through that I'd wake up tomorrow feeling completely different. So just knowing what it was and giving it a name and allowing it to happen helped me get through it.
That's great. Last question, and I apologize that we don't have time to take more. What are some tools that we can use to help our artists with their mental health, especially those with substance abuse issues?
Ooh, man. I wish I had a great answer for that. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, so there are a lot of things that are outside of my realm, and I would hate to answer that question because I don't know that I'm properly equipped to give a right answer for that.
Well, again, thank you for your candor. Then I'll do another quick one. I'm genuinely convinced that I am the most introverted on-air talent in country radio, and networking events like this are extremely hard for me. What practical advice would you give me to help me network myself more effectively other than just put yourself out there more?
What I was talking about earlier, the alter ego effect. My wife doesn't have an agent. She negotiates her own contracts. And excuse my language when I say this. When she's going in to go talk to somebody about a contract, I go, who's the baddest bitch you can think of? Be her for an hour. Like, who's the woman that, whether it's a TV character, whether it's a real life person that you think is just a boss, and go be them for an hour. And then you can come back home and be exhausted and scared and everything else, but just try to be that for an hour. Look, I'm naturally an introvert. I had to learn to be an extrovert from moving around all the time. I am uncomfortable in these settings, but I've learned how to become a different part of myself. I've learned that it's not a fake version of me. It's a small version of me that I've gotten comfortable with, and I can let that part out, but I have to fake it. And at the end of the night, I'm exhausted. Not just because we're drinking and hitting all these parties, but it's emotionally exhausting. But I have to transform into something else that's just a small sliver of me in order to get through that and become that social person. I think that's something that's highly effective.
Jason, thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining.